from what we've witnessed in Syria, Syrian American, but it brought the same images that we've seen in Aleppo and Idlib and other cities where you have mostly children and people trying to pull them from under the rubbles with their bare hands because there is no machineries and there is no fuel. And then fathers and mothers carrying what's left of their children, of their remains, and screaming to the world. And hospitals being attacked in Syria, more than 600 hospitals. And the same pictures of children who died in Madaya and Zabadani because of the siege. And now we're seeing similar pictures in northern Gaza with malnutrition, children dying because of the blockade. So, because I believe that there was no accountability to what happened in Syria and what's happening in Ukraine, there's similar scene that we are witnessing unfolding in Gaza.
Colin?
Yeah, Colin Lynch from FedEx. Could you maybe just talk a little bit, there seems to be a bit of a split screen from the enormity of the situation that you're all describing and the diplomacy around the response, and you're talking about the importance of influencing the U.S. The U.S. is very much focused on this notion of airdrops, pressure on Israel to provide more access, and now the big focus is on this maritime corridor. And I'd be curious from your perspective, are these these kind of efforts, are they really significant and meaningful? Is there a little kind of kind of absurdity to this notion that the responses that are being considered don't seem to be significant enough to really address what you're talking about?
I think, all of us in the humanitarian world, agree that airdrops and maritime aid is not the most effective or efficient or cost-effective or better way in dealing with the famine and the shortage of everything. And that land border crossing, and there are 6 border crossings, land border crossing in Gaza. Only one of them is used partially, which is Rafah border crossing. And the Karam Salim border crossing, which was supposed to be open, is not activated. And there's no reason why not other border crossing and Karam Salim and Rafah work for the full capacity. Actually, last month there's 50% drop of the number of trucks that are entering Gaza compared to the month before. So instead of going up, it's going down. I spoke with one of the leaders of Catholic Relief Services. He runs a warehouse in Gaza and in Rafah. And he told me that we need 1,000 trucks every day. Not the 500 pre-war, 1,000 trucks. So whatever is being done is dropped in the ocean. And I think it's a sign of impotence, not a sign of strength.
I'll add a bit to that. The certainly in the UK, the big focus from the government is on getting aid to Gaza, and there's been a lot of reporting of the airdrops, the maritime, and as I said, it's the land crossings are not being used appropriately. But the focus shouldn't really be on the amount of aid going to Gaza. It should be on the distribution of the aid within Gaza. Because however much aid you get to the Gaza, as long as there's ongoing military activity in Gaza, it's impossible for that aid to get to where it should be. I spent 2 weeks operating every single day in the operating theatres at Al-Aqsa. Some days we didn't have any surgical gloves, so we had to wash previous ones. Sometimes we had no surgical drapes. Many days we had no morphine. On many occasions, no antibiotics, so really limited resources. Knowing that actually a lot of those resources were probably in depots somewhere, or maybe in lorries queuing up outside at Rafah, but could not be distributed. And this is what is so urgent about the need for a ceasefire, is the only way that aid that's being delivered to Gaza, and we welcome every bit of aid, the only way that aid is going to get to where it's needed is if there is a ceasefire.
And you would think also that if we're able to achieve a ceasefire and we're talking about a maritime corridor, we're talking about airdrops, that we wouldn't also simultaneously be talking about defunding a UN agency that's on the ground that has a capacity to deliver the aid that we're talking about.
Jessica?
Hi, Jessica from France 24. I was wondering if you saw any injuries in any of your patients, and in particular in children, that might have been from drone attacks. I read that there were some signs of slightly different types of injuries from some drones.
I can certainly talk about the brother of a very close friend of mine who was shot. He is a nurse in the operating theatre, and he was shot in Nasser Hospital by a quadcopter, a drone with guns on it. And there were numerous stories, I think you may know more about Nasser, there are numerous stories of people being shot by drones with weapons.
Did it come into the hospital?
Yeah.
Outside a shop?
It came
inside?
into the hospital.
When was that?
3 weeks ago. I can share the details.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, please. Dr. Thaher brought up UNRWA very quickly. Could you elaborate more on how these attacks on UNRWA are affecting things on the ground from your perspective? 1 and 2, do you feel, this is a bit of a follow-up on Abdul Hamid's question, the positions and appeals from the UN officials here, do you feel, Dr. Thaher, you also spoke about the importance of conveying the urgency of the situation. Do you feel the statements, the positions, the appeals that are coming out of the UN are at the level of what's going on there? And what do you expect from UN officials? What would you like to see them do better? I'm not talking about Security Council, I'm talking about the rest of the UN.
I'll quickly say 2 things. The first, with respect to UNRWA, I think everybody understands that the work that they're able to do cannot be replicated. It's not going to be replicated overnight, over a couple of months. We're talking about an organization that has over 13,000 employees, 165 shelters with over 1.1 million people in those shelters. They focus on health, food security issues, they focus on water and sanitation, they focus on education. This is not something that you can just defund overnight and expect that everything is going to be okay. So, UNRWA is a lifeline to the people of the Gaza Strip. All 2.2 million people interact with what UNRWA's service is. And so I think it's especially important for us to recognize the work that they're doing on the ground, but also realize you have a very valuable partner that can reach the vulnerable communities, that's from the community and knows where to go and where the aid should go. I think that's very important. And then very quickly, the second thing, I just want to mention, we saw the IPC report talk about the severe malnutrition. If we remember, and we go back to November during the humanitarian pause, the World Food Program told us about the hunger situation in the north. They said 90% of households were doing negative coping mechanisms. They were skipping meals, they were trying to find whatever they could just at that point in November. And then in January, UNICEF told us that 1 in 6 kids in the north were acutely malnourished and needed intervention. And then we heard a couple of weeks ago that number is now 1 in 3. And then we get this IPC report. So I would say that the information that's coming out is telling us whatever we're doing and whatever we're saying, it's not enough, and that should change.
I think the statements of the UN officials are actually quite strong. And the fact that the Secretary General will be visiting Rafah next week is amazing. But we've noticed that in many other crises that we have a lot of rhetoric but no action. And I think all of us understand the reason behind that, that we have 2 or 3 countries that they have the veto power, which means that this system is not working for the current time. And I'm not the expert on UN reforms, but I think at one point there should be some reflection on what would be the better way to end the crisis, because the main purpose of the UN, as far as I know, is to make sure that there's peace in the world. And we're seeing crisis after crisis and disaster after disaster, man-made, with inability of the UN to implement its mission. And that has to make us, all of us, reflect on this issue and move towards more UN reforms.
Just a couple more before our doctors move on to the next meeting. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Alan Bulkati from news agency RIA Novosti. Have you ever witnessed the injuries sustained from the white phosphorus bombs in the Gaza Strip?
I haven't, no. I've heard numerous stories about it, but I haven't seen it myself.
And it's hard, when you have burns coming in, it's hard for us to be able to say this is from this or that. What we see are severe burns, and there's a ton of patients in the Gaza Strip with severe burns. So I don't think any of us are weapons experts or familiar with kind of military bombs in that to that degree.
What people described is a lot of burns, that more than the previous wars in Gaza. And I would, I think the local Palestinian physicians are the expert on what kind of weapon that has caused this injury. And I hope that you will have a chance to check with them, because they will tell you what weapon caused this type of injury. But what we were told, that there's a lot of burn, severe burn, that they did not see in previous wars.
I'll add one thing to Hassan Abu Sitta, who you'll be familiar with, who's a close friend of mine in London, who spent the first 42 days in various hospitals. He saw a lot of white phosphorus burns, and I've spoken to him about that, and describes them as very, very distinctive burns, which you can distinguish from this. I saw lots of burns, but just explosive burns. So I've seen photographs he took, and I think there is unequivocal evidence of that usage. I didn't see it myself.
The same, toward the beginning of the war, I'd seen photographs from surgeons with whom we work that look very much consistent with that, but very difficult to tell without being there. There's a certain smell that it emits, for example, so it's hard for me to say myself.
In the back.
Thank you, Nabil Al-Islam, Al-Arab TV station. We heard about some field hospitals deployed in Gaza. Have you worked with them, or have you seen the impact on the health system and the basic needs that people want? And also, how much we can expect from this kind of deployment? You think this could be a good alternative to the health system in Gaza that obviously needs a lot of work to be back in action?
Categorically, no. It is not an alternative, it is not a substitution. There were 35 functional hospitals in Gaza prior to the war. They are well equipped. The healthcare system was not perfect, but robust. The medical staff are some of the most intelligent people I've ever worked with in my life. No, you couldn't put up 1,000 field hospitals that would be able to address the needs in Gaza today. There are hospitals that.
So you can
I was saying you could put up 1,000 field hospitals and they wouldn't address they wouldn't address 1/10 of the needs in Gaza today. The hospitals that exist need to be rendered functional again. The health system needs to be restored. If there's anything to add to Gaza Strip, it would be post-operative beds. Lots and lots and lots of beds, thousands, tens of thousands of beds, just to be able to house all the people with surgical needs and non-surgical needs. Because while the hospitals themselves can function, you have to have a place to put patients while they're recovering. And that's where there may be a need for field hospitals in that sense, but absolutely not to replace the health system that existed before the war.
So before the war, there were 6,000 hospital beds in Gaza, in the 39 hospitals. Now, according to the last number I've read, there's 295 hospital beds remain. I'm aware of 4 field hospitals. One, the Emirati field hospital, one is the Jordanian field hospital, one is the IMC, and Kuwait. So all of these will add probably 300 additional beds. The problem with field hospitals, I visited the Emirati hospital, it's quite impressive actually. They have the only functioning CT scan, by the way, for 1.5 million people in Rafah. And they have 200 beds, but for some reason they had only 80 patients, although they had more capacity to receive more. And they have quite good surgeons. Actually, before we went to Rafah, we were told that if you are injured, you will be admitted to the best place in Gaza for treatment, for your treatment, which would be the Emirati field hospital. But it's not enough. Other field hospitals are level 1, which means that they treat patients with dehydration and common conditions, but they're not going to be able to operate complicated surgery or take care of patients in the ICU. So I agree with Amber that there's need to rebuild the other hospitals, make sure that they are equipped with medical equipment that were destroyed, make sure that doctors go back to the hospitals and the community rebuild around the hospitals. That's how can you avoid further morbidity and mortality.
Just 1 or 2 more. Go ahead.
Yes, Stefano Carabuccio in New York. I wonder what the people these patients, but also the people that just stays around the hospitals, what do they think about, do they believe that Israel will stop if all the hostages are released, or if the Hamas leave, do they believe something like that? How do they react? Or they don't believe it at all and they say, no, they will continue and kill us anyway?
That's a good question. What I know, and I think this is a sentiment that we all witness, that people want for the war to stop. And at one point when we were in Rafah, there was this rumor, which we were not aware of, that there is a ceasefire. And then we heard a lot of people chanting in the streets in the area, and we did not know why they are chanting. We looked at the TV, there's nothing there. And then I think Thaer went and asked, and they said, we heard that there's a ceasefire. So people actually believe that at one point there will be ceasefire and that the war will stop. They actually, I found them more hopeful of the war stopping and rebuilding and going back to their places in northern Gaza. Many of them, I asked them, would you go back to northern Gaza? They said yes. And we know that we're going to be living in tents for maybe a few years, but they want to go back to the northern Gaza. And I did not frankly see the bitterness that I expected to see in the people that I interacted with. People are quite resilient and patient and honorable and dignified, and they are thinking of futures. I just want to give one story about children, because children do not lie. Every child I asked, what would you like to be in the future? They said doctor. They did not say martyr or fighter, they said doctor. Except for one child actually, and that reflects your question. He said, what future? He was completely traumatized, he was in displacement center. So people are looking for the future. Gaza has one of the highest literacy rate in the region, much better than many of the neighboring countries around and Gaza. And people want to live and want to rebuild and want to stay in their home. And I think the international community and the UN can help them, not only in ceasefire, but also in the day after ceasefire.
And I think it's very dangerous to try to paint an entire population with one brush. I think that we tend to do that when we talk about the global south or when we talk about the Middle East or many regions of the world. People have different opinions and different beliefs, just like they do here or any country where any of us come from. The population, yes, many, the ones that we've worked with are very resilient. And they look to their futures of our staff, because I can't speak for the entire population, but within MSF staff, what I hear about is I'm worried about my children today and my home for tomorrow.
Add very briefly to that, I think we've all clearly spoken to many Gazans and we've got slightly different experiences. One of the things I've loved about the Gazan people over all those years is as Amber said, their resilience, their hope, their never giving up attitude, and they really are a truly beautiful people. I've spoken to a lot of people out there who actually are losing that now. They are losing hope and wanting to get out. There are clearly people with different views, but it struck me when I was there how many people now are losing that hope, and they talk about how that was a clear aim of the Israeli Defense Force, to destroy everything in Gaza that's worth living for.
Final question.